Close your eyes for just a moment. Imagine the Mississippi heat in the summer of 1844, not the comfortable warmth of a summer afternoon, no. I mean the thick kind, the kind that sits on your skin like a second layer of clothing, the kind where the air itself seems to breathe. Now imagine you are standing on a dirt road outside Natchez, Mississippi, and the whole world smells like red clay and river water, and something else, something floral you can't quite name. Sweet, heavy, dark, then lighter, cleaner, two smells at once, coming from different directions, coming together. You look up, and there, at the end of the road, standing completely still, are two women, one as dark as the Mississippi soil after a long, hard rain, one as pale as the cotton blossoms in the fields behind her. And even from where you stand, even from that distance, something deep in your chest tells you that what you are looking at is not ordinary. Something in the most primitive part of your brain, the part that existed before language, before reason, before religion, that part whispers run, but you can't. Because they are already looking at you, and their eyes, one pair dark as night, one pair pale as winter milk, are looking at you with the exact same expression, the exact same intensity, as though they have always known you were coming, as though they have been waiting. This is the story of Dalia and Lily, and I want to warn you before we go any further. This is not a ghost story. It is not a fairy tale. Every document, every diary entry, every medical report you are about to hear is real. It is preserved, it has been studied, and it has never, not once in nearly 2 centuries, been adequately explained. So, let's begin. The first time Dalia and Lily appear in any official record is June 14th, 1844. The ledger of the Riverside Auction House in Natchez, Mississippi. Now, you have to understand something about these auction records. They were not kind documents. They were transactional, cold, brutal in their precision, age, height, physical condition, skills. Every detail recorded to establish price, every human being reduced to a line item in a ledger. But this entry is different. It reads, twin females, approximately 20 years of age, one of pure complexion, one afflicted with white condition, origin unknown, sold as single lot to intermediary for Belmont interests, price withheld from public record, notice what's missing, no physical description beyond their coloring, no mention of skills or trade, no origin, just origin unknown, and that price withheld from the public record. Here's where it gets interesting. That price was finally discovered in 1967, tucked inside private Belmont family papers. $18,000 in 1844, when a strong, healthy field hand sold for around $1,500. When even the most accomplished and educated house servant rarely exceeded $3,000. Somebody paid nearly 6 times the going rate for 2 women nobody could explain where they came from. And the Belmont family, one of the most powerful, most politically connected families in all of Mississippi, paid it without blinking, without even publicly recording what they spent. You have to ask yourself, what on earth did they know? The Belmont family was not a family you trifled with. 3 plantations, 15,000 acres of Mississippi cotton country, deep connections in Washington, in New York, banking houses, in every courthouse and church in the region. These were serious, practical men who built empires on cold calculation, men who did not act on whims, men who did not pay extraordinary sums for things they could not account for. And yet, when Dalia and Lily arrived at the Belmont mansion, something completely unprecedented happened. They were not sent to the fields. They were not assigned to the kitchens or the laundry or the house staff. Instead, according to architectural records and servant testimonies gathered decades later, they were placed in a specially prepared section of the mansion itself. The third floor, the east wing, a suite of rooms that had previously been used for storage, now cleared and prepared for two women who had just been purchased like property. And it gets stranger still. This wing was accessible only through a single locked corridor. Now, think about that for a moment. Plantation owners simply did not house enslaved people within the family living quarters, not unless they were the most trusted of house servants, and even then, only in designated servant areas. To give an entire wing to two newly arrived women, that wasn't favor. People in that world didn't operate that way. That was something else entirely. That was containment. The first official confirmation that something was deeply, profoundly wrong came just 2 months after the twins arrived. August 1844. Dr. William Ashford, the Belmont family physician, was called to examine both women for what appeared to be injuries. What he found left him struggling for words in his own medical report. He wrote, and I want you to really hear this asterisk, the wounds appeared identical in location, depth, and length, which was peculiar given they had supposedly been injured in separate incidents. More remarkable still, the injuries appeared to have healed to a degree that would typically require 7 to 10 days. Yet they were, by all accounts, only 48 hours old. So, identical wounds, obtained separately, healed in less than a third of the time it should have taken. But that wasn't even what disturbed him most. What disturbed Dr. Ashford most was this: he measured their pulses. At the same time, with his assistant holding one wrist each, 48 beats per minute, identical. And the beats did not just match in speed, they were synchronized, beat for beat, as though a single heart was pumping blood through two separate bodies. He tried separating them, placed them in different rooms. Both became immediately distressed, rapid breathing, signs of what he called severe agitation. And here's the part that should send a chill right down your spine. Even in separate rooms, even unable to see or hear one another, their physiological responses remained in perfect synchronization. Their distress mirrored each other precisely. Their hearts still beat together. Dr. Ashford closed his report with something he called improper to include, in a medical document, a subjective impression. He wrote that he left the Belmont residence with an inexplicable sense of unease that persisted for several days. A medical doctor, a man trained in rational, empirical observation, unsettled for days. The enslaved community in Vicksburg had their own understanding of what was happening. Of course they did. They always do. The official record tries to exclude their voices, but their voices survived anyway, passed through generations, preserved in interviews and oral histories. An elderly woman named Claudia, interviewed in 1932 when she was 97 years old, remembered her time as a house servant on a neighboring plantation. She said, and this detail has stayed with me since I first read it, asterisk, we called them the night and day flowers because one bloomed in darkness and one in light, but they was the same flower. Split in two. Asterisk, she said the old women knew immediately that the twins weren't altogether of this world. That something had touched their mother before they were born, something that marked them for a purpose nobody could understand. She said even the dogs knew. You have to understand, in this era, these were working plantation dogs, not pets. Mean, trained animals, dogs that feared nothing. They would whimper and hide when the twins came near. A man named Isaiah, who had been enslaved on the Belmont property, gave another account in 1928. He said you always knew where the twins had been by the smell. Two smells, he said, one sweet like night, blooming flowers, dark and heavy, the other light and clean, like magnolia in the morning. But when those two smells mixed together, he said it made something else entirely, something that turned your stomach while it drew you in. That detail, that mixed fragrance, will keep appearing in this story, over and over, from entirely different sources. From people who had no contact with each other, spanning decades, but I'm getting ahead of myself. By the autumn of 1844, things had escalated enough that the Belmont family made a decision that tells you everything about how frightened they had become. They called in a minister, Reverend Thaddeus Price, Baptist, known throughout the region for his stern moral convictions and his reputation for spiritual discernment. The kind of man you called when you believed something wasn't right with the world. Fragments of his diary survived, despite his later attempts to destroy his own papers. And what he wrote on November 3, 1844, is one of the most extraordinary documents in this entire case. He described arriving at the East Wing, being introduced to the twins, who sat together on a settee, holding hands, fingers intertwined in what he called an almost ritualistic manner. He described the contrast between them, one with skin he called rich and seemingly luminous, the other so pale she appeared almost translucent, like a spirit made flesh. And he described their faces as identical in every feature, mirror images that somehow made their differences more striking, not less. Then he described their gaze. He wrote, I had the most peculiar sensation, as though their dual gaze was reaching into my mind from two directions at once, extracting memories I had long buried. He thought of his brother. Dead 20 years, of words spoken in anger to his wife, words he had never confessed to anyone, all of it rushing through him in seconds. And he had the terrible conviction, he said, that he could not shake, that they were aware of every thought. That together, they were reading his soul like a book open before them. He tried to engage them on spiritual matters. He spoke of sin and salvation, and Dalia spoke first, in a voice he described as resonating with deep tones. Reverend, she said, you speak of sin and salvation. Then Lily continued, her voice higher, clearer, but perfectly synchronized with her sister's rhythm. But what if there are souls that exist outside that framework? And then together, in perfect unison, in voices that became one voice. What if there are people who were never meant to be saved or damned, who simply are? Reverend Price resigned from his pulpit the following month, citing health concerns. He never ministered again. His wife wrote to her sister that December. She said, Thaddeus is not the man he was. He wakes at night in terror. I hear him weeping and speaking of mirrors and shadows and twins who are really one. Now this is where it gets truly dark, because the effects of the twins' presence weren't limited to those who met them face to face. Throughout the winter of 1844 and the spring of 1845, a series of events began to cluster around the Belmont family's associates. Charles Belmont's business partner, Richard Thornton, died suddenly at 42. His widow noted in her private letters that in the weeks before his death, Richard had become obsessed with what she called the mirror problem at the Belmonts. He had begun covering all the mirrors in their home. The overseer at one of the Belmont plantations, a man named Thomas McKinley, began exhibiting what others described as increasingly erratic behavior in March 1845. He claimed he could hear two voices singing at night, in a language he didn't recognize. He told his wife he had seen the twins standing at the edge of the cotton fields at dusk, even though the Belmont household swore they never left their third, floor rooms. On May 3rd, 1845, Thomas McKinley was found dead. Heart attack, the official record said. His final journal entry had been written and rewritten dozens of times across the same page. Just one sentence, over and over, until the paper was nearly worn through. Asterisk, they are not two. They are not two. They are not two, asterisk, and then there was James Belmont, Charles's younger brother, who, in April 1845, claimed to have watched the twins in the doorway of one of the family's facilities one evening. Watched them step toward each other, watched their silhouettes overlap, watched the shadow they cast together, neither wholly dark nor wholly light. 2 weeks later, James Belmont was dead by his own hand. On his desk, a crude drawing, 2 figures, one shaded dark, one left white, an equal sign, and then a single figure, half dark and half light. Below the drawing, written in his own hand, asterisk, God help us when they remember they are one. Asterisk, after James's death, the Belmont family did something that speaks volumes about their desperation. They hired science, Dr. Adrian Rowley, New Orleans, advanced training in European medical institutions. Brought to Vicksburg in June 1845 under strict confidentiality, paid handsomely, given, as the records say, unusual latitude. His research journal was discovered in a private Louisiana collection in 1973, and it reads, I want to be very honest with you, like something out of a Gothic novel. Except it isn't. He documented experiments with blood transfusion. He found that Dalia's blood introduced into Lily's system caused no adverse reaction whatsoever. More than that, it caused their vital signs to synchronize even more perfectly than before. When he reversed the procedure, the same thing happened. As though each transfusion was strengthening a connection that already existed on a level he couldn't explain. He documented separation experiments, even with a simple partition between them, unable to see or hear each other. Both women immediately exhibited severe distress. Hearts racing, breathing labored, calling out to each other in voices that, he wrote, seemed to harmonize impossibly. And yet, even in their distress, their physiological responses remained in perfect synchronization. Their hearts beat as one. Their breathing fell into identical patterns, as though the partition was irrelevant, as though the distance meant nothing, as though they remained connected by something that existed beneath or beyond the physical world. Dr. Rowley's entries grew increasingly troubled through July 1845. He began having vivid dreams in which he saw through 4 eyes simultaneously. 2 perspectives that merged into a single vision. In these dreams, he understood with what he called terrible clarity that Dalia and Lily were not truly separate individuals. They were 2 halves of a single consciousness, split between 2 bodies. His final entry, dated August 20th, 1845, is a desperate warning. He wrote, asterisk, I am leaving Vicksburg immediately and will not return. They are not merely twins with an unusually strong connection. They are fragments of something that was never meant to be divided. Something that is actively seeking to become whole again. I strongly advise that they be kept separated at all times. Under no circumstances should they be allowed to see their own reflections together in a single mirror. Asterisk, and then the entry ends with the sentence that has haunted researchers for decades. Asterisk, I have seen what happens when they stand before a mirror together. The reflection does not show 2 figures, it shows one. Asterisk, 6 days later, Dr. Adrian Rowley was found dead in a swamp outside Vicksburg, officially accidental drowning, but the medical examiner's private notes tell a different story. The body had decomposed far more rapidly than science could account for, and Rowley's eyes, those careful, scientific eyes had changed color. One had become very dark, almost black. The other had become pale, almost colorless. The Belmont family responded the way powerful people always respond when they are truly frightened. They doubled down on control. No more holding hands. Rooms separated with a locked door between them. Mirrors removed entirely. And perhaps most strangely, they were never to be allowed in direct sunlight together at the same time. A letter from Margaret Belmont to her sister that September reads, **, it seems their connection strengthens when they are in physical contact, and that sunlight somehow facilitates the strengthening. And then, in a moment of startling humanity, she added, I think of them sometimes, those poor creatures, split between two forms, longing to become whole. Is it mercy to keep them separated, or is it cruelty? But the phenomena did not stop. Throughout the winter of 1845 and into 1846, neighboring plantation owners began reporting something deeply unsettling, sightings at twilight, at the edges of their properties of two figures, one dark, one pale, standing motionless, watching, and these sightings were occurring simultaneously at locations miles apart, at times when the Belmont household staff swore both twins were secured in their rooms. A planter named Harrison Wade recorded in his diary that he approached one such sighting with his rifle, and as he drew near, he realized he could see through them like projections, like shadows given form. He called out to them, and both turned to face him, and then they began to walk toward each other, and as they drew close and closer, still he could no longer tell where one ended and the other began. When they finally touched hands, he said, there was a moment, just a moment, when he could not distinguish between them at all. Then they were gone, leaving only that strange mixed fragrance and a feeling he called profound wrongness. A Yale professor named Elias Thornton was brought in March 1846 to study the twins. He lasted 9 days. His private journal entry from March 24th describes waking at 3 in the morning to find both women standing at the foot of his bed, standing together, holding hands, boundary between them blurring where they touched. They spoke in unison, we are tired of being divided. We want to be whole again, then they faded. He recommended to the Belmonts immediately that they release the twins, writing, I do not believe any force on earth can keep them separated much longer. The Belmont family did not listen. On the night of April 30th, 1846, during a powerful thunderstorm, something happened that no one has ever been able to fully account for. The 3 guards assigned to the East Wing were found unconscious the following morning, all 3 with identical expressions of terror frozen on their faces. When they were revived, none could remember what had happened. One kept repeating just 2 words over and over, they merged. They merged, the twins' rooms stood open, both doors unlocked from the inside. The rooms were empty. On the wall between the 2 rooms was a mark that no one could explain. It appeared to be a scorch mark, but it was neither wholly dark nor wholly light, seeming to shift between the 2 depending on the angle from which it was viewed. Its shape was roughly human, but it contained figures overlapping, merging into a single impossible shape. More disturbing still, in Dalia's quarters, everything had become slightly paler. In Lily's quarters, everything had darkened slightly, as though each had left behind some essence of herself, or perhaps taken some essence of her other half, in preparation for something that had finally, irrevocably happened. The Belmont family organized search parties, offered substantial rewards, but Dalia and Lily were never seen together, never verifiably, separately again. What did continue were the sightings, through the late 1840 and into the 1850s, witnesses reported strange figures at twilight, sometimes a dark woman alone, sometimes a pale woman alone, but increasingly something else, something described by multiple Unconnected witnesses across different decades as a single figure whose appearance seemed to shift depending on the angle of view. A woman who couldn't quite decide what she looked like. A traveler named Marcus Whitfield recorded one such encounter in 1849. He wrote that as he approached a woman standing by the road at dusk, he could not determine her complexion. She seemed to be both. And when he drew alongside her and she turned to face him, he saw that she possessed 4 eyes, 2 dark and 2 pale, all 4 looking at him with the same expression of what he called profound sadness, mixed with triumph. He heard, or perhaps felt, a voice that was 2 voices speaking in perfect unison. Asterisk, we are almost whole again. Soon we will be one. Asterisk, in 1962, when the former Belmont mansion was being demolished, workers breached the sealed east wing. The rooms were almost pristine after more than a century. The scorch mark on the wall between the rooms was still visible, and workers reported that when viewed from the corner of the eye, it seemed to move. Beneath the floorboards, in a small wooden box, they found objects: a lock of black hair tied with a white ribbon, a lock of white hair tied with a black ribbon. The strands had been woven together so completely that they could not be separated. When the box was opened, the dual fragrance filled the room so powerfully that several workers had to leave. Those hairlocks were donated to the Mississippi Historical Society, and when DNA analysis became available, scientists examined them and produced results they could not explain. The black hair and white hair showed genetic markers consistent with a single individual, as though one person had somehow produced 2 entirely distinct types of hair. Science had no framework for that finding. It still doesn't. I want to take a moment here, before we reach the end of this story, and ask you to sit with something, because it would be easy to look at this case and reach for the comfortable explanations: mass hysteria, exaggeration, the particular psychological pressures of a society built on brutal dehumanization coming apart at its seams, and those explanations account for some of what happened. They really do, but they don't account for the DNA. They don't account for synchronized heartbeats measured simultaneously by a physician and his assistant. They don't account for the scorch mark on that wall. They don't account for the dozens of unconnected witnesses across 6 decades, all describing the same figure, the same fragrance, the same sensation of being seen from 2 angles at once. An academic researcher named Dr. Maria Reyes wrote her dissertation on this case in 2003. She spent years in the archives. She examined every document, every diary, every physical piece of evidence she could access. And in her conclusion, she wrote something I think extraordinarily brave for an academic to commit to paper. She wrote, asterisk, after years of research, I have come to accept that some aspects of this case will never be adequately explained within our current frameworks of understanding. What occurred in Vicksburg between 1844 and 1846 involved phenomena that we do not yet have the language or concepts to fully comprehend. Asterisk, she began as 2. She strove to become 1. And if continuing reports are to be believed, she succeeded in achieving a state that is neither 2 nor 1, but something else entirely. People in Mississippi still call her the Twilight Woman. Sister Soul, a figure seen at dusk or dawn, at crossroads and thresholds and the edges of fields, a being that is both dark and light, both 1 and 2, both of this world and somehow beyond it, and those who encounter the mixed fragrance, that dark, heavy sweetness combined with something lighter, more ethereal, sometimes report a feeling of presence, of being observed from 2 angles simultaneously, of being seen so completely that there is nowhere left to hide. In 2015, an anonymous visitor to the Mississippi Historical Society wrote in the guest book, asterisk, I came to research my family history and happened upon the Dalia and Lily files by accident. As the sun set, I swear I smelled flowers, 2 types blending together. When I looked up, I saw reflected in the window glass a figure standing behind me, but when I turned, no one was there. Yet in the reflection, I could still see her or them, one form that seemed to contain two, looking at me with eyes both dark and light. I heard, or perhaps felt, the words, "We are still here, still together, still one and two and neither." Asterisk, here is what I want to leave you with. What I think this story is really about, underneath all the strangeness and the documented phenomena and the unanswerable questions, the Belmont family and every man who tried to study, contain, explain, and control Dalia and Lily was afraid of one thing above all others, not the synchronized heartbeats, not accelerated healing, not even the mirror that showed one figure where there should have been two. They were afraid of wholeness. They were afraid because the entire world they had built, that rigid, brutal, categorized world of 1,844 Mississippi, depended on division, on keeping things apart that belonged together, on maintaining separations that had been imposed by force against the deep grain of nature. And here were two women whose very existence refused those separations, whose bond could not be locked behind a corridor or a doctor's report or a minister's sermon or a plantation overseer's authority. The world tried to make them into property, into a problem to be managed, into an anomaly to be studied and contained, and they simply refused, not loudly, not violently, not in the way that would have given their captors a justification to act. They simply held hands, breathed together, waited, and then, on a stormy April night, they did the one thing that terrified everyone who had tried to keep them apart. They became whole. We don't have a word for what they became. We don't have a category for it, a framework for it, a comfortable box to put it in. We only have the scorch mark on the wall, the DNA that doesn't make sense, the fragrance that keeps being reported by people who have never heard the story, the figure at the edge of the field at twilight, seen from the corner of the eye. And maybe that's the point. Maybe Dalia and Lily exist now precisely in that space that our categories can't contain, in that liminal, threshold, impossible space between, reminding us that the deepest bonds cannot be owned, cannot be divided, cannot be locked away in a corridor on the third floor of a mansion, reminding us that when something is whole, it will always, always find its way back to itself.